The wineglass caught the last of the light, a thin halo trembling at its rim. Across the table, Elliot's smile was all teeth and claim as he called me dead weight. My daughter laughed, too quickly, too softly, and I felt something ancient and dangerous settle in my chest. He thought the vineyard was the prize. He didn't realize I was the line it couldn't cross. Before we start the story, tell me where you're tuning in from, and don't forget to subscribe. The glass caught the last of the light like a held breath. Outside the kitchen windows, the vineyard lay in disciplined green rows folding into dusk. Inside, the dinner table was curated without looking curated. Linen the color of cream. Rosemary tucked into napkin rings, the scent of charred lamb weaving through the air. I'd plated it myself. I always did. People claim they can taste love. What they're really tasting is control. Camille, Elliot said, turning the stem of his wineglass like a prop. This cab is almost too generous. If we pour more, we'll have to drag the deadweight to Italy for the honeymoon. He smirked. Isabel laughed, but the sound was thin, almost apologetic. Her nails grazed the back of his hand like a silent plea for me to play along. Aunt Regina's jaw tightened, her knife and fork moving with surgical restraint. I set my own fork down. Not loud, not theatrical, just a deliberate sound against porcelain. Dead weight, I repeated, soft as a tasting note. He didn't catch the echo. Men like him rarely do. Kidding, he said, raising his glass as if we were co-conspirators. Anyway, we're thinking late September for Florence. Maybe Puglia, rustic chic. Do they do truffle season then? They do, I said. We could host something at a vineyard over there. He went on. One wine family to another. The toast in his eyes wasn't for me, it was for himself. Mom curates the best. Isabel jumped in quickly. You should have seen the harvest dinners when I was little. Oh, I can imagine, Elliot said, slick as olive oil. Old school. Like The Godfather without the crime. Without the men who smile wrong, Regina murmured to her plate. The conversation pivoted, but he didn't notice the cold front he'd caused. He told a story about an investor he'd outmaneuvered, how charm and pressure worked in his favor. Each time Isabel asked a question, he touched her wrist, more possession than affection. I let him talk. The rosemary lamb bled its scent, the beans shone under olive oil, the wine unfurled with black cherry and leather notes. He misnamed a vintage with my late husband's handwriting on the back label. 2011, not 2012. I corrected him only in my mind. Silence, in the right hands, is a scalpel. Camille, he said suddenly, the last year must have been heavy. He looked at me like a man inspecting a fragile antique. Lucky you have us, right, Is? We'll take care of her when we move in. Not a question, a preamble. Of course, I said, my voice steady. We'll make space. He heard permission. I meant warning. By dessert, figs with mascarpone, honey dark at the edges, he'd decided we were allies. He kissed Isabel's temple, cleared plates without knowing where they belonged, and told me, You can lean on us, Camille. We'll keep things light. Light, I repeated. When the door closed behind them, I poured one last glass, walked to my study, and unlocked the bottom drawer. The estate binder slid out heavy into my hands. If he thought I was dead weight, he was about to learn I sink ships. The binder was still on my desk when the sun came up, its navy cover heavy as a verdict. By mid-morning, I was sliding it across a polished walnut table in my attorney's office. Outside, Napa's courthouse square basked in polite sunshine, but in here, the air was cool with coffee and printer ink, the scent of permanence. Daniel Roth had been my estate attorney for 15 years, a man who spoke in precise clauses even over cocktails. He glanced at the binder, then at me. You called for an emergency slot, he said. What changed? One word, I told him. Dead. His brow arched. He didn't ask me to elaborate. He knew I didn't deal in melodrama. I want to revise distribution, I said, sliding the binder closer. If my daughter marries a mistake, everything pauses. No cash flow, no asset access, no implied dowry disguised as love. Daniel's pen clicked like a lock engaging. Name the mistake. Elliot Chambers, I said. He nodded once, the professional acknowledgement of a surgeon hearing the diagnosis. We can draft a conditional suspension. If Isabel is married to this man, distributions halt for 5 years. 5, I repeated. Long enough for charm to fade, long enough for truth to surface. Aunt Regina, sitting beside me in a crimson scarf that made her look like trouble in silk, leaned in. Make it airtight. Charm is temporary. Contracts are forever. Daniel's pen moved across the legal pad. Assets covered, notice protocols, audit rights, and a reversion clause. If you die while Elliot is legally family, the vineyard, house, and trust revert to charity. He can't touch a grape, a beam, or a penny. The idea landed cold in my chest. Charity, I said. Preferably one aligned with your legacy, he replied. We could expand the Foster Foundation. She'll think it's about money, I murmured, but it's about memory. Daniel's eyes softened. You want to save her without telling her. I nodded. She doesn't need a lecture. She needs a safety net she won't see until she's falling. As he outlined the clause, Regina tapped the table. And make sure no in-law can be appointed trustee, executor, or agent, ever. Daniel smiled faintly. Noted. When he flipped open the binder, an old piece of paper slid out. Yellowed at the edges, my late husband's blocky handwriting across the top. Contingency. Unsuitable spouse clauses. I touched it as though it might vanish. He thought about this. Looks like it, Regina said quietly. Daniel laid the paper aside. We can fold his intent into this amendment, protect the estate, and protect Isabel from becoming collateral. The legal language was dry, but its edges were sharp. Suspension, reversion, fiduciary duty. We wove in triggers for audits, restrictions on shared accounts, and a quiet monitoring protocol that would alert me if her credit was misused. This wasn't spite. This was fortification. When it was time to sign, my pen hovered over the paper. My late husband's name was embossed in gold above mine. I thought of Elliot's smirk, his careless, dead weight, the way he'd looked at my home like it was already his. Then I signed. The sound of ink on paper was small and final. Daniel gathered the documents. It's done, quietly. If she asks, you tell her. Until then, this is your line in the sand. Sometimes, Regina said as we stood, the kindest thing you can do is build a wall. Back at the house, a thick cream envelope sat on the porch. I slid a finger under the seal and pulled out a gold-foiled card. Save the date. His parents' names gleamed in print. Mine were missing. I stared at the blank space where I should have been and thought, they've already started erasing me. Top of form. The gold-foiled save the date sat on my kitchen counter for 3 days, face down. I didn't RSVP. I didn't mark a calendar. I didn't even slide it into the drawer where I keep wedding things. The drawer for people I actually want to celebrate. On the 4th day, my phone lit up. Isabel, you're coming, right? I stared at the screen until the bubbles disappeared. Then I typed back, let's talk soon. No emoji, no promise. The rest of the day moved like a wine press, slow, heavy, squeezing every drop of patience I had left. If Elliot was going to marry my daughter, I was going to have a full dossier on him first. Not assumptions, not suspicions. Facts. So I started keeping a ledger, a leather-bound notebook from my desk drawer, the kind my husband once used for harvest notes. Each page held an entry: time, place, exact wording. The wine dinner where he called the servers kiddo. The tasting where he told a sommelier her job was cute. Every offhand remark about leveraging Isabel's contacts. It was tedious, and it was deliberate. Men like him don't hang themselves. They keep a whole drawer of pre-tied nooses if you look closely enough. The real break came when I opened the household mail and found a statement from a leasing company in San Francisco, addressed to Isabel, but listing an apartment I knew she'd never seen. The deposit had gone through on her personal credit. Elliot's name was nowhere on it. My hands were steady as I took a photo of the page. That night, over chamomile tea, I slid the statement across Aunt Regina's kitchen table. The overhead light caught the faint embossing of the company logo. She studied it for all of 2 seconds before saying, "This isn't just sloppy. This is calculated." "Find out everything," I said. Regina's mouth curved the way it does when she smells blood. "I'll need a night." The next morning she called before sunrise. Her voice was alive, sharp as citrus. "Got something. Lawsuit. 3 years ago. Settled quietly. NDAs all over it." "What kind of lawsuit?" "Fraud adjacent. A business partner claimed Elliot diverted investor funds to cover personal expenses. He didn't admit guilt, but he wrote a check big enough to keep the complaint sealed." She paused, then added, "And before you ask, no, this doesn't just go away because he married someone. In fact, marrying into money makes him more dangerous." I felt the tightness in my chest shift. Not loosening, not yet, but aligning into something purposeful. I pulled the save the date from the counter and turned it over in my hands. On the back, there was a faint watermark of eucalyptus leaves. It looked peaceful, harmless. It also looked like a smokescreen. That morning, I sat at my desk with my notebook and wrote down exactly what I had: credit misuse, lease under Isabel's name, sealed lawsuit 3 years ago, pattern of transactional behavior. I capped the pen, slid the notebook into my briefcase, and pulled out a slim black folder. The kind you don't give to someone unless you're ready to change how they see the world. I thought about the last time I'd taken Isabel to lunch, how she'd picked at her salad while telling me Elliot understood her grief better than anyone. I wondered if she'd see the contents of this folder as rescue or sabotage. Either way, I wasn't showing up at her wedding. I was showing up at the table where she still had a chance to choose. I picked up the phone, dialed her number, and said, "Lunch. Tomorrow." Then I set the black folder on the counter, its seal unbroken, and waited for the weight of it to do its work. We met at a corner table in the bistro on Main, the kind of place where the plates are white and the air smells like truffle oil no matter what you order. Isabel walked in late, hair pulled back like she'd run her fingers through it instead of a brush. She hugged me, but her eyes darted to the black folder sitting between the water glasses. "Mom," she said, sliding into her chair, "you're being cryptic." I pushed the folder toward her. "I brought something you need to see." She hesitated, then opened it. First page. The San Francisco lease in her name, monthly rent circled in red. Second. The bank statement showing the deposit drawn from her credit card. Third. The court record printout, the sealed lawsuit, dates and amounts highlighted. Her face went pale, then hot. "Where did you get this?" "From the mailbox. From public records. From people who know how to look." She blinked, hard, and I saw the defensive walls slam into place. "Are you trying to ruin this for me?" "I'm trying to keep your name safe," I said quietly. "Even if mine gets dragged through the mud to do it." Her jaw tightened. "You don't understand him. You're twisting things." "I'm reading numbers," I said. "He's explained the lease." I leaned forward. "Did he explain the lawsuit? Or did he tell you it was just another investor who didn't get him?" The waiter appeared, oblivious, with menus. Isabel waved him away without looking. "You're making this about you," she said. "No," I said. "I'm making this about what happens when he makes you the collateral damage." She closed the folder with a snap. "I'm not doing this." Her voice cracked, but she swallowed it down. "You can hate him all you want, but you don't get to blow up my life because you don't like who's in it." "It's not about like," I said, my voice low enough that she had to lean in. "It's about survival." She stood, the chair scraping the floor like a rip in the air. "I'm leaving." And she did, moving fast, head down, clutching her bag like a shield. I stayed long enough to pay for the coffee neither of us touched. By the time I stepped outside, the street was bright with the early afternoon rush. Tourists at the wine shops, the scent of sourdough drifting from the bakery. She was gone. Back at home, Aunt Regina was waiting in the kitchen, leaning against the counter with her scarf off, and her hair pulled into a loose knot. "Well?" she asked. "She defended him," I said. Regina's mouth pressed into a line, then let her run, but keep the door unlocked. I nodded, because I understood. Locked doors don't just keep people out, they make them less likely to come back. That night, I sat at my desk and opened the estate binder again. The ink from the last amendment was barely dry, but I added another clause. Daniel had suggested it during our last meeting, and now I saw the wisdom in it. If Isabel marries Elliot Chambers, her inheritance is suspended for 5 years after my death. 5 years for grief to clear, for illusions to fade, for her to remember who raised her. I initialed each page, the pen steady in my hand. The house was quiet when my phone buzzed. I didn't recognize the number at first, but the tone of the message was unmistakable. "Stay out of it. You've had your life." I stared at the text until the screen went dark. The words burned into my eyes. Elliot wasn't guessing. He knew exactly what I was doing. And now, he wanted me to know he wasn't afraid to play offense. Bottom of form. The morning after Elliot's text, I sat at my desk with a cup of coffee I didn't drink, staring at my calendar. Every wedding commitment I'd made, every check written, every call placed, was now a lever I could quietly remove. The rehearsal dinner reservation at Rutherford's, canceled with a cordial email. "Our plans have shifted. Thank you for understanding." The Vintner friends I'd promised to invite called one by one and told, "Let's reconnect after harvest." My family rate with the florist, released to another client. No arguments, no drama, just absence. By noon, Isabel was calling. "You canceled the dinner?" Her voice was tight, too measured. "Yes," I said. "It didn't feel necessary." "Didn't feel necessary to who?" she snapped, but I heard someone speaking to her in the background, male, low, and she hung up. 2 days later came the brunch. He'd invited half of her college friends, a few of his colleagues, and just enough peripheral people to make it look like a celebration rather than a PR stunt. I didn't go, but word traveled fast in this valley. Between mimosas and eggs, Benedict, he introduced me to the table, in absentia, as retired drama. The phrase caught in my ear like a burr, not because it was insulting, but because it was lazy. Men like Elliot usually choose their jabs with more precision. He was slipping. That night, Aunt Regina showed up with a manila envelope under her arm. "From a reliable ghost," she said, sliding it onto my counter. Inside were copies of the San Francisco lease, stamped and signed. The ones in Isabel's name. She'd sent them, anonymously, to one of Isabel's closest friends. The one who could plant a doubt and make it look like her own thought. "If anyone can make this seed grow," Regina said, pouring herself a glass of Cabernet, "it's her." I took the envelope back. Gardening season then. The next morning, I met with my banker in a private office, tucked behind frosted glass. His tie was slightly crooked, the way it always was, and his voice was quiet enough to make you lean in. "I'd like to temporarily freeze all shared family accounts. I said. Do you want me to flag any beneficiary changes? Yes. And notify me immediately if anyone tries to add themselves as a signer. He nodded, sliding forms across the desk. The paper was thick, the pen smooth, the kind of pen that makes decisions feel permanent. I signed each page without looking up. That Friday, I was pruning roses when I saw him walking up the gravel path in a navy blazer that didn't belong anywhere near soil. He stopped just outside the open gate. "This isn't your call anymore," he said, his smile stretched thin. I turned the shears in my hand, the sunlight flashing off the blade. "That's what you think. You're making things harder than they need to be." His voice had lost its performative warmth. "This is between me and Isabel now. You can keep your distance, or—" He let the sentence trail off, like an invitation to imagine the threat. "I don't take orders from people who lease on someone else's credit," I said. A shadow passed over his face, then was gone. "Enjoy your garden, Camille." That night, when I returned from dinner at Regina's, there was a thick envelope on my hall table. The seal was embossed, the weight familiar, the kind of letter that came from people who assumed they were in charge. Inside was a notarized document. Elliot had added himself to Isabel's emergency estate form, listed as her legal contact in case of incapacity. My pulse stayed steady, but my hands curled around the page. He wasn't just circling her life anymore. He was digging himself into its foundation. The notarized letter still sat on my desk when I began writing. The paper was thick, lined with the faint scent of cedar from the drawer it came from. My pen moved slow, not from hesitation, but from precision. Every word a bead on a tripwire. I titled it Wedding Week Wishes, the kind of sentimental list a mother might give her daughter before she walks down the aisle, the kind of thing people keep in scrapbooks without realizing it's a warning. The first wish was innocuous, that you laugh so hard your bouquet shakes. The second, less so, that you remember who stood beside you the first time someone called you less than you were. By the fifth, they were quieter, sharper, that you notice the people who don't speak when you're insulted. And by the seventh, if he doesn't flinch at truth, test his silence. I slid the folded list into a cream envelope, but I didn't seal it yet. I had something else to add. From a box in my closet, I pulled a framed photograph. Isabel at 9 years old, cheeks pink from running through the vines, standing next to her father in his work shirt and ball cap. His hand rested on her shoulder, his face turned toward her, with that quiet pride that had made me fall in love with him in the first place. Tucked behind the frame was a letter he'd written her the summer she left for college. She'd read it once, then packed it away like you do with things that feel too big to absorb at the time. The handwriting was blocky, confident. Never confuse someone wanting you with someone valuing you. I placed the photo and letter in the envelope with the list. Sealed it. When I stepped into the kitchen, Regina was already there, leaning against the counter with her phone in hand. "You look like you're mailing a grenade," she said. "More like planting one," I replied. She pocketed her phone and crossed her arms. "Speaking of planting, I've got us a private investigator on retainer. Quiet, thorough. No cowboy stunts, but if things get uglier, we'll be ready." "You think they will?" I asked. Regina didn't answer with words. Just that sharp, knowing look that meant, of course. I sent the envelope by courier. By the time it would reach Isabel, she'd be in the middle of final fittings, vendor calls, and whatever performance Elliot was putting on that day. Which meant the moment she opened it, her reaction would be unfiltered. That afternoon, I tended the vines along the west field, the soil dry under my boots, the air heavy with sage from the hills. The repetition of pruning calmed me, but my mind kept circling the same question. Would she read the list as love or as interference? 3 days passed without a word. Then, at 10:37 p.m. on the fourth night, my phone buzzed. Just one text. Him. "Everything still on track?" Me. No response. And then, from Isabel, The first message since the brunch fallout. One word. No punctuation. No explanation. Just help. The morning of the rehearsal, the vineyard was wrapped in a strange quiet. Even the breeze through the olive trees felt slow, like the air itself was waiting for something to break. I didn't drive to the chapel. That was deliberate. Instead, Regina and I sat in her sedan, parked half a block down from the ivy-covered building. The sun glinted off the stained glass windows, the light fractured into small, restless shards. Inside, the guests were gathering. Outside, I could already feel the tension in the air, sharp and metallic. From the open side door, I saw him first, pacing, phone in hand, his voice too loud for the sacred space he was standing in. His blazer was perfectly tailored, but the sleeves creased as he gestured hard into the air. "Where is she?" he barked at someone inside. Isabel was late. 10 minutes, 15, 20. When she finally arrived, it wasn't with the flurry of a bride-to-be running behind schedule. She walked in slow, head high, hair loose over her shoulders. The first thing I noticed, her left hand was bare. No engagement ring. From our vantage point outside, Regina murmured, "Oh, this is going to be interesting." Elliot moved toward her quickly, his arms spread in mock relief. "Finally," he said. "You had me worried." Her face was unreadable. "We need to talk." He glanced around, at the minister, at the small crowd of friends, at his parents. "Later. We're about to run through—" "No," she cut in. "Now." The shift in his jaw was subtle, but I caught it. His grip tightened on her elbow. She pulled away. Regina nudged me, whispering, "She's already halfway out the door in her head." We stayed in the shade, silent witnesses. Whatever she said next was too quiet for me to hear, but it was enough to make him drop the polished groom act. His voice went sharp, the kind that doesn't match the smile plastered on his face. Guests started murmuring, chairs creaked. And then, without another word, Isabel turned. She didn't run. She walked. Past the minister, past the pews, straight toward the open doors. Elliot called her name, his voice chasing her down the aisle, but she didn't turn back. The guests shifted, confusion blooming into whispers. His mother's face went pinched, his father's mouth a thin, unhelpful line. As she stepped into the sunlight, Regina leaned out the car window and called, "Exit stage left, darling." Isabel looked over, saw us, and without hesitation slid into the back seat. Her hands were trembling, but her eyes were dry. "You didn't come inside," she said to me. "I didn't need to," I replied. She let out a breath, half a laugh, half a release. "I think I just ended it." We drove away before Elliot could follow, the sound of chapel doors closing behind us like the last clap of a gavel. When we reached the turnoff for the main road, Isabel's phone started buzzing in her lap. She didn't answer. Regina glanced at me in the rear view. "What's the move?" I took out my phone, opened my lawyer's contact and typed, "Initiate Trust B." She walked away. "Send." The reply came almost instantly. "Understood." By Monday morning, Elliot was already in damage control mode. The chapel incident had spread in whispers, the kind of whispers that move faster than truth. And he was determined to spin them before they hardened into fact. I heard from 3 different people before noon that he'd been telling anyone who'd listen that I'd bribed Isabel to walk away. His version had the melodrama of a bad TV movie, a grieving mother waving inheritance papers in her daughter's face, dangling a fortune like a carrot. It might have been laughable if it weren't dangerous. Men like Elliot don't need to be believable. They just need to plant enough doubt. I didn't answer him publicly. My lawyer did. By that evening, Daniel had issued a statement. Short, crisp, loaded with timestamps and documented exchanges. It clarified that Isabel had independent counsel, that no changes to her financial future had been made without her knowledge, and that the decision to leave. The rehearsal had been hers alone. He attached a timeline so tight it could have choked the rumors. The next move was Isabel's. I sat at my kitchen table the following morning as she signed the paperwork to revoke his power of attorney, a power he'd convinced her to give him for convenience 6 months earlier. The pen didn't tremble. Her signature was swift, almost defiant. "Feels like taking my name back," she said. By midweek, I handled my part. There was a joint real estate escrow, a pied-à-terre in the city Elliot had convinced Isabel to enter into with him, using her credit and a portion of her trust disbursement. The paperwork was clean enough that on paper it looked like they were equal partners. I liquidated it before he could blink. The funds bypassed him completely, redirected into an account he couldn't touch. The sale posted the next morning. Regina called me over coffee. "You know he's reading the numbers and choking on them." "Good," I said. That afternoon, I made my own public statement. 12 words, posted without photo or hashtag. My legacy is not a dowry. It spread farther than I expected. Friends of friends shared it, quoting it like a mantra. Strangers messaged me to say they'd printed it and stuck it to their mirrors. I didn't reply. It wasn't for them. It was for him. By Friday, Isabel was back in my orbit. Literally. She moved into the guest house, her suitcases stacked neatly in the corner, the air smelling faintly of lavender from the linen closet. We didn't talk much that first night. She made tea. I poured wine. The silence was companionable, not strained. From my kitchen window, I could see the glow of her reading lamp in the guest house. It reminded me of when she was little, a small pool of light in the dark, signaling she was safe for the night. Around 9 p.m., I heard the faintest rustle on the front porch. Not a knock, just movement. When I opened the door, the night air was cool and smelled of the rosemary bushes by the steps. On the mat sat a single envelope, cream-colored, no return address. My name was written in a bold, looping hand I recognized instantly. I turned it over once in my hands but didn't open it. The paper felt warm, as if it had just left his grip. Whatever was inside, Elliot wanted me to see it, and that was reason enough to wait. The envelope sat on the hall table all night like a live coal. By morning, the house smelled like coffee and cool stone, and the vineyard mist clung to the windows as if the fog itself were eavesdropping. I carried the letter to the sitting room and set it on the mantel beside the fireplace poker. Isabel's lamp still glowed faintly in the guest house across the courtyard. She was asleep, safe. I could afford to read the poison. I slit the envelope with the edge of a butter knife. The paper sighed as it gave. "Camille," the first line began, written in large, confident script. "I know you see me as a threat, but we're both just people who love the same woman. You've been through a lot. I get that grief makes you cling. I forgive you. Forgive me." He went on, an economy-sized apology stuffed with discounts. Sorry you felt. Sorry about misunderstandings. He offered kindness like a coupon he could redeem later. He reminded me that optics matter and said we should align on messaging to avoid reputational spillover. He mentioned an investor dinner on the calendar and how Isabel deserved a unified front. He promised to step back from finances, in writing, if I would publicly walk back the narrative. Narrative. As if love were a pitch deck and my daughter a KPI. He closed with a flourish. "You've built something remarkable. Let me help you protect it." Elliot. The room went still enough to hear the clock tick like a metronome for a bad song. I folded the letter once, then again, neat as linen. I struck a match. Sulfur flashed in my nose, bright and acrid, that first bite before flame. I fed the corner of his plea into the small mouth of the fire. The paper blackened obediently. Regina stepped into the doorway, already dressed, scarf loose, coffee in hand. Her eyebrows climbed. Still giving him heat, huh? Just light, I said, watching the ink curl. The words he chose unwrite themselves into smoke. Heat is temporary. We stood there until it was ash. I took the poker, nudged the black flakes into a tidy grave, and closed the screen. Ready? She asked. Ready, I said. We made calls. Not to friends. To people with letterhead. By noon, Daniel had a draft on my phone, a cease and desist addressed to Elliot and his co-founder. Attached was a screenshot I hadn't wanted to believe. Isabel's face, bright and laughing, used on a landing page for his new venture under the headline, "Backed by Family, Built on Trust." The photo was ours, a candid from a harvest dinner year ago. He hadn't asked. He never asked. Send it, I told Daniel. He did, with timestamps, language sharp enough to shave with. Unauthorized use of likeness, implied endorsement, injunctive relief on deck if they didn't remove it within 12 hours. A polite threat in a tailored suit. Meanwhile, I sat at my kitchen table and signed a stack of documents that put steel between my life and theirs. Personal asset protection motion, clean lines, clear boundaries, legal separation of everything, accounts, real property, business interests. If a storm was coming, the shutters were already latched. Regina watched me sign, her rings clicking softly against the glass as she turned her water. He thinks reputations are currencies he can exchange, she said. He forgets some of us use them as shields. Good, I said. Let him hit metal. By afternoon, the venture's page was down. A bland placeholder appeared in its place. We're making updates. A junior PR person sent Daniel a skittering email about miscommunication, punctuated with emojis as if punctuation could soften liability. My lawyer's reply could have been framed and hung in a museum of surgical strikes. Outside, the sun burned off the fog. The vineyard lines sharpened as if someone had drawn them with fresh pencil. Isabel texted me from the guest house. Saw the site. Thank you. I didn't know. A beat then. I should have. I typed back. Seeing is not the same as being shown. Don't punish yourself for the difference. 3 dots appeared. Disappeared. She sent a heart. It landed like a small bird in my chest. The phone rang again. Daniel. Asset motion filed, he said. Effective immediately. How public is it? More than quiet, less than spectacle, he said. Which is what you asked. I ended the call and set my phone face down. The house hummed with the ordinary sounds I'd learned to hear again since the worst year. The refrigerator's gentle thrum, the wind fingering the rosemary by the steps, the click of a distant gate. Then my screen lit up, bright in the corner of my eye. Regina's voice floated in from the doorway. You're trending. I didn't move. For what? She came closer, reading from her phone with dry amusement. Women over 40 are losing their minds, in a good way, over, my legacy is not a dowry. They've scented blood and scent of freedom. Also, he posted. I took my phone back and opened the app. There it was. His profile photo, collar open, smile calibrated, his caption under a black and white thinking shot. Some women never know when to let go. The comments were already splitting into camps, the gullible and the awake. I could feel the axis of the fight shifting under my feet. We were leaving the garden for the square. He had dragged us there, but I'd chosen to walk. Regina watched my face. Well, she said, sounds like it's public now. It is, I said. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. I slid my phone into my pocket and turned toward the study. So let's make it count. The ash in the fireplace settled like snowfall. Outside, the evening light went honey gold, the kind that makes everything look softer than it is. His post blinked again on my screen, bait with a smile. I didn't bite. I opened a new email to Daniel instead and typed, Proceed public, full record. Then I hit send and watched the line between private and public disappear. We sat at the kitchen table with 2 cups of coffee cooling between us and a neat stack of folders I'd pulled from my desk. Outside, the vines were in that early spring green that makes the valley look deceptively soft. "Let's restore what he chipped away," I told Isabel. Her shoulders sagged. "You make it sound like it's that easy." "It's not easy," I said, sliding the first folder toward her. "But it's doable, and it starts here." For the next 2 hours, we combed through her finances, credit reports, account statements, old payment histories where the late fees were his, but the hits to the score were hers. Every joint account was a wound he'd left open. I circled numbers in red, wrote cleanup steps in the margins. This card, close it. This loan, refinance under your name alone. These accounts, untangle now before he tries to use them as leverage. The color returned to her face with each page we crossed off. By the time we reached the last folder, her voice had steadied. "What's this one?" she asked. I pushed it toward her. "A personal account. Mine. Now yours." Her eyes widened. "It's fully in your name," I explained. "No strings. Consider it. Seed money. Not for him. Not for anyone else. Just for you." She shook her head. "I don't." "You do," I said. "You need a clean start. Not just emotionally, financially. The rest you'll build yourself." Her fingers rested on the folder like it was a fragile thing. "Thank you." That afternoon, we moved on to something less clinical. The guest room. The same room she'd slept in as a teenager after late-night study sessions, still painted the soft blue she'd picked at 16. We pulled the furniture away from the walls, laid down a tarp, and opened the first can of fresh white paint. The scent of it bloomed in the air, sharp, clean, a reset. "You know this is symbolic, right?" I said, dipping my roller. "I figured," she said with a small smile, "but I also hated that color." We worked in companionable silence, the rhythmic sound of rollers over drywall mixing with the soft scratch of the bristles in corners. Layer by layer, the old shade disappeared, replaced by something bright and new. Regina arrived just as we were peeling the painter's tape from the trim. She carried a small velvet box in her palm. "This is for you," she said, pressing it into Isabel's hand. Inside was a silver pendant, simple, oval-shaped, etched with a single vine leaf. "To remember who raised you," Regina said, "and where your roots are." Isabel's breath caught. "It's beautiful." "It's solid," Regina replied. "Beauty fades. Solid doesn't." When we'd finished for the day, Isabel sank into one of the armchairs in the living room, her hair pulled into a loose knot, paint smudged on her wrist. "You've done so much," she said. "You don't owe me a thank you," I told her. "Just a better future than the one you almost stepped into." Her smile was small, but real. "I think I can do that." We ate dinner in the kitchen, roast chicken, rosemary potatoes, a bottle of Cabernet that had been waiting for the right moment. It felt like one. The evening was quiet, the kind of quiet that doesn't feel heavy. I was clearing plates when my phone buzzed on the counter, a blocked number. The text was short, just 10 words. "I'm suing you for emotional sabotage. Elliot." I set the phone down slowly, my reflection in the black screen calm, even as I felt the next battle lining up on the horizon. The cease and desist had landed, the accounts were clean, and then his message arrived like a pebble against a window. "I'm suing you for emotional sabotage." Fine. If he wanted courtrooms and captions, I'd give him transcripts. Daniel spread a stack of documents across my dining table, the wood catching morning light like honey. "We'll prepare a defamation counteraction," he said, tapping the top page. "Preserve evidence, demand retractions, and put him on record. He's been sloppy online." Regina set a mug of coffee down and leaned over the pages. "Sloppy is generous," He's arrogant. Arrogant leaves fingerprints, Daniel said. While he drafted, I felt the old ache of court. How air gets too clean, how voices turn into instruments. I wasn't afraid of it. I was tired of the performance. Regina's phone buzzed. She glanced at the screen, went still, then turned the volume up. A hiss, a clatter of glasses, bass from another room, and Elliot's voice. Unmistakable, buoyant with alcohol and ego. You just have to play the mom. He laughed. You know? Make her feel seen, then move the paperwork when she's grateful. Family offices are just bank vaults with feelings. A chorus of male chuckles. Someone asked, "And the daughter?" "Easy," he said. "She's sweet. She wants a leader. POA by Christmas." Watch the room seem to tilt. The timestamp on the voice memo. New Year's Eve, 2 winters ago. Location tag. A private house in St. Helena. Regina's eyes were flint. "Where did you—" I began. "From someone who caters more than canapes," she said. She recorded it because he was a jerk to her staff all night, then bragged within arm's reach. She didn't know what to do with it until now. Daniel's pen stopped mid-note. "That's not just swagger, that's intent." He looked at me. "May I?" "File it," I said. My voice came out steady. "And don't whisper." He moved fast. The audio was authenticated, metadata preserved, affidavits drafted. He submitted it with our counterclaim, an exhibit that turned Elliot's threat into a boomerang. He also sent a summary to a journalist he trusted, a woman who'd covered wine country economics long enough to smell rot under lavender. By afternoon, the article was live. Founder recorded bragging about playing the mom for family access. No adjectives, just quotes and context. The clip embedded cleanly, his laugh turned incriminating in under 8 seconds. I watched the comments bloom like a controlled burn. Investors asked questions in daylight. Women shared the post like a siren. Even the polite corners of Napa started naming what they'd always side-eyed. At 5:13 p.m., his venture posted a terse update. 2 sponsors have paused partnerships pending internal review. At 6:02, the co-founder, Elliot's cleaner, quieter shadow, resigned effective immediately, citing ethical differences. Regina exhaled through her nose, pleased. He thought reputations were chess pieces. Turns out they're dominoes. I walked to the French doors. The vineyard had gone gold in the late light. A hawk rode a thermal, unbothered. My reflection in the glass looked like a woman I recognized again. "I didn't destroy him," I said. "I just stopped protecting him." Behind me, the printer clicked and spit out another page. Daniel gathered the stack, crisp with purpose. "We'll move to depose his team, lock down any attempts to tamper with records, and request his communications about your accounts. He'll hate discovery more than he hates losing face." "Good," Regina said. "Let him meet consequences like a mirror." That night, Isabel tugged on a blazer and stood by the door, hesitant. "There's a seminar at the community center," she said. "Women and financial boundaries. I want to go." "Go," I said. "Take notes. Take up space." She returned 2 hours later with a folder of pamphlets and a different set to her shoulders. "They talked about naming what you see," she said, dropping onto the couch. "How the first step is paperwork and the second is language." "What did you name?" I asked. She looked me in the eye. "Coercion." Then softer. "And fear." She swallowed. "And mine." We sat in the warm quiet. A moth tapped once against the window screen, then found its way back to the dark. My phone chimed. Daniel again. Court accepted the counteraction and scheduled an expedited hearing on his claims. Press covered the filing neutrally. "Stay the course." I put the phone face down. Regina, who'd been pretending to read, said, "He'll try to control the one thing he thinks he can." Proximity. The gate camera pinged, Headlights washed over the gravel in a cold sweep. A car door shut. Footsteps crunched. The night smelled like dust and rosemary. Isabel stiffened. Is it? Regina peered at the monitor, mouth going flat. He brought himself, she said. I walked to the foyer, every movement deliberate, and stopped 3 feet from the intercom. I could see him through the iron lattice of the gate. Blazer, jaw set, eyes too bright. The porch light reflected off the metal bars, striping his face. He lifted his hands, palms out, a practiced performance of harmlessness. His voice found the microphone like a snake finds warmth. Camille, he said, smile barely tethered, we need to talk. I didn't press the button. I let the camera record, the red light steady, as I reached for my phone and dialed security first, then my attorney. Outside the gate, Elliot waited under the porch light like a moth that hadn't learned about flame. He stood outside the wrought iron gate, hands raised like a man arriving in peace, voice pitching itself into the intercom with just enough tremble to mimic sincerity. Camille, let me explain. The night was cool, the kind of Napa evening where the air smells faintly of crushed rosemary and diesel from a distant tractor. I stayed inside, leaning against the foyer wall, watching him through the camera feed. His hair was too neat for an unplanned visit, his shoes too clean for someone pacing gravel. There was nothing to explain. Not anymore. I reached for the house phone, pressed speed dial, and told the security company, visitor at the gate. Not welcome. While I waited, I hit record on the camera system. The red dot blinked in the corner of the screen as Elliot began pacing. He moved in sharp, agitated lines, hands slicing through the air like punctuation to a speech only he could hear. Just open the gate, he said, voice carrying that brittle edge that lives between charm and panic. We can settle this. Off the record. I didn't touch the intercom. Silence is heavier than steel when you know how to hold it. Isabel appeared in the hallway, hair loose around her shoulders, eyes darting to the monitor. She didn't speak, just stood beside me, arms wrapped across her chest. Elliot stopped pacing long enough to look straight into the camera. You're making a mistake, he said. I'm trying to be reasonable. I picked up my phone and drafted a quick email to Daniel, attaching the video feed. Subject, harassment, in progress. Body. Evidence attached. Proceed with filing. Security arrived within minutes, their headlights sweeping over the driveway. Elliot tried one last performance. Hands open, smile rehearsed, but when they asked him to leave, his expression cracked. He got back in his car without another word, the sound of his tires on the gravel sharp as teeth snapping shut. Inside, Isabel was still standing in the same spot. She reached into her pocket, pulled out her phone, and scrolled without hurry. Then, with a single flick, she deleted his number. The soft click of the case snapping shut was louder than anything Elliot had said that night. An hour later, the kitchen smelled of cinnamon and butter. Regina was rolling out pie crusts like she'd been planning it all along. We celebrate the living, not the loud, she said, brushing the dough with egg wash. And certainly not the trespassing. I poured her a glass of wine, the color rich and steady in the lamplight. Consider this dessert a victory lap, she added. When the pie was cooling on the counter, I took my glass and walked out to the vineyard. The sun was setting low, turning every vine into a black silhouette against the gold sky. The rows stretched out in perfect, stubborn lines, the work of decades, the kind of legacy you can't buy in a single lifetime, no matter how many contracts you forge. The air carried the faint scent of soil still warm from the day, the quiet broken only by the soft rustle of leaves in the breeze. I walked slow, one hand trailing over the tops of the vines, feeling the rough, familiar texture of the wood under my fingertips. Pride doesn't always roar. Sometimes it walks with you at dusk and keeps pace, silent and sure. When I returned to the house, a small stack of mail waited by the door. Most of it was the usual: vineyard invoices, a thank you card from a charity auction. But one envelope stopped me cold. Cream paper, my name written in my late husband's handwriting. The return address wasn't our own. I slid a finger under the flap and froze at the heading: From the estate of Jonathan Foster. Inside was a single folded page, a note from the past, sealed in its own envelope, waiting for me to open it. The paper crackled like dry leaves as I unfolded it. Old ink. Older. Resolve. The letterhead was the kind our lives used to wear. Plain, practical, no flourish needed. Dated September 12th, 1994. Jonathan's pen had pressed hard. The grooves ghosted the back of the page. Cam, it began, if this finds you, it means I needed to say something on record. Not just in passing between rows of vines. Isabel is going to be irresistible to men who smile wrong, the kind who test boundaries because it's easier than building their own. Promise me we protect her with paperwork and with spine. Teach her that love without standards is just noise, and if anyone ever calls you heavy, remember, you're fire. You carry the line so everything behind you lives. I had to sit. The room smelled like cinnamon from Regina's pie cooling on the counter, and the window let in the vineyard's dusk, gold crossing into blue. My throat burned. Not with grief this time, but with recognition. Mom? Isabel stood in the doorway, hair pulled into a loose knot, the silver pendant Regina gave her resting against her collarbone. What is it? Your father, I said, patting the spot beside me. He left us a map. We sat shoulder to shoulder on the sofa. My hands trembled only once as I read aloud. Each line landed like a fence post set where the ground had been eroding. Paperwork and spine. Your fire. Carry the line. Isabel's breath hitched. Then she laughed, a wet, surprised sound. Of course he called you fire. He always said you could stop a brush fire with a look. He wasn't wrong, I said, and the laugh caught in my own chest, turning into tears. We let it happen. The crying, the laughing, the long exhale of a year we'd both been bracing against. When it passed, she wiped her cheeks with the heels of her hands. I forgot who you were, she said softly. Or maybe I forgot who I was around you. I forgot too, I admitted. I forgot I'm allowed to be the person who carries the line. I held up the letter. He didn't. We sat in a warm, companionable quiet. The ice in the water glasses clicked. Outside, a tractor lumbered somewhere in the distance with the unconcern of a creature confident in its lane. Okay, Isabel said at last, straightening. What do we do with that? Two things. I rose and went to my desk, where the estate binder lay waiting. I slid in a fresh page, headed it Preamble, and wrote, in my own hand, My daughter's love is not for sale. This estate honors her freedom, not her leverage. The words settled on the page like anchors. I signed and dated it. A small sound, that pen scratching, but it felt like laying track. And the second? Isabel asked. I looked out the window at the rows that had held us upright for 2 decades. We changed the name, I said. Foster has carried us. It's time to name what we are. Regina, as if summoned, appeared in the doorway with 2 slices of pie. Name it out loud, she said, already half smiling. Fireline Estate, I said. The syllables warmed the room. For the crews who hold the burn, for the women who do the same. Regina raised her fork like a toast. Fireline it is. We moved quickly, not out of haste, but conviction. By morning, the graphic designer sent 3 mock-ups. A slender vine etched into a horizon of scorched line, green meeting black, life meeting limit. We chose the one with the smallest flourish, the strongest stance. The printer ink smelled like rain on hot gravel. We called the staff together by the barrel room. The air there is always cool, a cathedral for oak and patience. I told them what was changing and what wasn't. We would keep our hands in the soil, our standards on paper, our name where our mouths had always been, guarding the line. Fire line, the tasting room manager repeated, testing the word with a grin. I like that it's not just pretty. It isn't meant to be, I said. Word traveled, the way it does here, on breezes and back channels. By afternoon, someone had posted a shot of the new label on social with a caption quoting my line, "My legacy is not a dowry." The comments didn't just applaud, they testified. Vineyard workers, sommeliers, teachers, mothers. Story after story about boundaries set late and still saving lives. I felt the axis shift, away from the tight circle of our house, outward. My name stopped being a whisper between lawyers and became something else in the square. Not spectacle. Stand. Isabel watched the shares pile up from the kitchen island, eyes wide. They're rallying. They're recognizing themselves, Regina said, licking a bit of cinnamon from her thumb. And they're recognizing her. She nodded at me. The phone rang then, an unfamiliar number with a local exchange. I almost let it go. I answered instead. "Ms. Foster," a woman's voice said, brisk and kind. "I'm calling from the Napa Herald. We're running a Sunday feature on Fireline and your public statement. Also, you should check today's afternoon edition." A pause. Charged. Front page. Below the fold. I hung up and opened the paper that still lands on my step out of habit and affection. The ink bled faintly onto my fingers, the way it always has. Below the fold, column 2, an apology to the Fosters. The byline was his. He had written it, or had it written, formal, scrubbed of adjectives, regrets for unfair characterizations, acknowledgement of inappropriate use of image, a note about stepping back to examine personal values. Hollow to my ear, maybe, but public. Traceable. A statement you can nail to the door if you need to later. Isabel leaned over my shoulder. "He actually published that?" "He had to," Regina said. "The fire reached him." We didn't cheer. Firefighters don't celebrate the flame, they respect the line. I wiped the ink from my hands on a dish towel and looked out at the vines, the light now copper, the rose as steady as ever. I felt not bigger, but truer. The story had left our walls and kept my name intact. As the sun dropped, another notification pinged. Wine and Trade Weekly had picked up the story, branding Fireline a standard-setting reframe of legacy. Beneath the headline, a single sentence. Camille Foster drew a line, and an industry moved. I folded the paper slowly, a new weight in my hands, and wondered who would try to cross that line next. The dining room was strung with soft gold lights, their glow pooling onto long white tablecloths. Outside, the vines rested under a twilight sky, but inside, the air hummed with low conversation, clinking glasses, and the scent of rosemary chicken drifting from the kitchen. It was the kind of gathering that looked, from a distance, like a wedding reception. Only there was no aisle, no vows, no cake. This wasn't a wedding. Isabel had called it a thank you, and the invitation said nothing else. The guest list was small. Family, a few close friends, 2 of my vineyard staff who had been with us since her childhood. Regina was in the seat to my right, scarf draped like a banner, a look in her eyes that said she knew exactly what this night meant. When the plates were cleared and the first round of wine poured, Isabel stood. She wore a simple navy dress, no jewelry but the pendant Regina had given her. She looked around the table, her gaze landing on each face as if she were cataloging the safety of the room. "I asked you all here because..." She hesitated, then smiled, soft but sure. Because sometimes the people who deserve a celebration aren't the ones you thought you'd be toasting. Sometimes they're the ones who got you back to yourself. Her voice cracked, just enough for the room to hold its breath. Thank you for seeing me when I didn't. The applause was gentle, the kind that carries weight rather than noise. She sat, and I knew it was my turn. I rose slowly, my glass in hand. When Isabel was little, I taught her that there are three things no one can take from you unless you hand them over: your standards, your story, and your silence. I felt every eye on me. Your standards tell you what you will and will not accept. Your story tells you who you are and where you stand. And your silence. I paused. Your silence is power when you choose it, and dangerous when someone else does. The room was still. Even the candles seemed to lean in. This year, my daughter nearly gave all three away, I said. Not because she's weak, but because someone made her think compromise was the same as love. It's not. I gave her life twice. Once when I birthed her, and once when I took it back. I let the words settle. They didn't need embroidery. A murmur rippled through the table. Someone dabbed their eyes. Across from me, one of my vineyard staff, a man who'd been with us since harvests were measured in sweat and not profit margins, gave a small nod that meant I understand. Regina raised her glass. To taking it back, she said, her voice bright but edged. The toast was answered with the clink of crystal, the sound sharp and clean. No one spoke Elliot's name. They didn't have to. It hung in the air like smoke from a fire that had already burned itself out. The rest of the night unfolded without ceremony, and yet it was a ceremony all the same. There was music, nothing formal, just an old playlist that somehow still fit the mood. People laughed over wine, shared bread and pie, and drifted into smaller conversations. Isabel moved between guests with ease, her shoulders lighter than I'd seen them in months. She wasn't performing. She was present. No cake was served. We didn't need it. The sweetness was in the air, in the freedom of the room, in the unspoken agreement that this was a night we'd remember not because of what it wasn't, but because of what it had become. When the last plates were stacked and the lights dimmed, I walked Isabel out to the patio. The night was cool, smelling faintly of damp earth and the first whispers of spring. The moonlight caught in her hair as she leaned against the railing. She didn't look at me when she spoke, but her voice carried in the quiet. "You saved me," she whispered, when I couldn't even see it. The words slipped into the night, heavy with gratitude, but also with something else. An awareness that saving someone is only the beginning. The pen felt heavier than metal as it touched paper, a small gravity in my hand. In Daniel's office, morning light slid over walnut and glass. The air smelled like coffee and dry paper, the scent of decisions that outlive their makers. I signed the final amendment, then the confirmation letter, then the directive that made everything simple and non-negotiable. "Effective today," Daniel said, stacking the pages with careful precision. "The estate consolidates under a single beneficiary, Isabel Foster, sole owner, sole steward, no marital riders, no future in-laws as trustees. Every clause points to her, by name." "By name," I repeated. "In her name only." He nodded, a small bow to the intent rather than the power. "This is clean. Anyone who tries to touch it will leave fingerprints." I slipped the signed copy into my bag. The zipper's quiet rasp sounded like relief. Outside, Napa was all bright sky and trimmed hedges. Somewhere, a delivery truck rattled past, and the breeze picked up the smell of yeast from a bakery down the block. Life, indifferent and abundant. Back at the vineyard, the new signage caught the light. Fireline Estate. The letters were lean, quiet, certain. Visitors arrived with curiosity and left with stories. In the tasting room, women took photos under the new crest, vine leaf crossing a black line, and tagged us with captions that had nothing to do with tannins and everything to do with standards. Elliot didn't vanish in a single day. Men like him taper like smoke. Sponsors had already stepped back. The co-founder found a cleaner harbor. His profile went from daily commentary to weekly spin to a flat line of wellness quotes. I knew he still existed somewhere. Gym mirrors, rented views. But he was blocked on our phones, non-existent in our books, and legally irrelevant to anything that mattered here. Isabel didn't need the money to feel safe anymore, but she needed what it represented. Control returned. We met with our accountant in the barrel room, where the air is cool and sweet with oak, and moved the last stubborn accounts into her sole name. She signed with a steady hand, the pen gliding over her initials as if it had been waiting for them all along. "I feel taller," she said, smiling without apology. "You are," I said. Regina appeared in the doorway, sunglasses hooked into her hair, a grin she pretended to hide. "The distributor from Sonoma just called," she said. "Wants in on Fireline's fall run." "Tell them we don't lower standards for demand," I said. "Already did," she replied. "They loved you for it." We celebrated small. Lunch at the long kitchen table. Sunlight pooled on the wood. Rosemary in the air from the shrub by the open door. Later, Isabel and I walked the rows, the soil warm through the soles of our shoes. She told me about a business class she was taking online. Foundations of finance, risk, governance. Nothing flashy. Everything essential. "You're building more than a vineyard," I told her. "I'm building a spine," she said with a half laugh. "Paperwork and spine, right?" "Paperwork and spine," I echoed, and for a moment I could hear Jonathan's voice between the vines. By evening, the guests who'd wandered through the tasting room were gone, and the property returned to the sound it makes when it's just us, the small, living hush of a place that knows it is held. I set 2 chairs on the flagstone patio behind the house. The sky turned that ink blue that makes stars look closer than they are. Crickets, tuned up. Somewhere down the road, a dog barked once and thought better of it. Isabel came out carrying 2 glasses and a bottle we had saved for something that didn't have a name until now. She poured with a steady wrist. The cab hit the glass like velvet. Black cherry on the nose, a ribbon of smoke I hadn't tasted since the 2012 harvest. We touched rims lightly. "To starting over," she said. "To starting right," I said. We drank. The wine opened like a door. Regina joined us a few minutes later with a bowl of olives and the kind of smirk that means she's about to be kind the only way she knows how. Sideways. She settled in, crossed her legs, and tipped her glass in my direction. "Not bad for dead weight," she said. I didn't flinch. It felt good to not flinch. I let the words sit for 1 heartbeat, then 2, then handed them back the way they were always meant to be returned. "Dead weight doesn't build legacies," I said. Regina laughed, low and pleased. Isabel leaned her head against my shoulder. The 3 of us watched a satellite crawl across the dark and pretended it was taking messages to people who should have lived to see this. In the distance, the new sign caught a stray beam from the porch light and threw it back. A thin shine, nothing gaudy, just proof. I thought of the first night, the lamb and the linen, the word he'd chosen like a cheap joke tossed into my house. I thought of the drawer with the key, the binder with our names, the clauses like beams under flooring that looks effortless because someone did the work. I thought of the letter from 1994, the handwriting that told me I was fire, and the line I carried when someone tried to turn my daughter into leverage. Isabel breathed in, breathed out. "We're okay," she said. "We're better than okay," I answered. "We're us." The air smelled like cut grass and cooling stone. A night bird called. Somewhere the irrigation ticked on, a soft, practical music. I stood to top up our glasses, and in the window's reflection, I saw three women sitting where once I had imagined a son-in-law. The picture was smaller, maybe, but truer. There was no empty space any longer, only room we chose to keep. We raised our glasses one last time, not toward the past, not toward the man who'd tried to write himself into our future, but toward the rouse that would outlast even this moment, steady and stubborn and ours. He left with nothing. She stayed with everything, including me.